What happens when the most ruthless Alpha King in history sentences a fragile human prisoner to death, only to watch his entire bloodthirsty pack drop to their knees before her? This isn't a fairy tale. This is the brutal, forbidden history of the Dunhollow Pack and the human who broke their king. Historical records from the Ethelgard Mountains in the winter of 1142 speak of a season so unforgiving that birds froze mid-flight. But for the human settlement of Oakhaven, the cold was the least of their terrors. It was the year the Treaty of the Silver River collapsed, and the northern wolves, the fearsome Dunhollow Pack, descended upon the human territories with a vengeance. Among the captives taken that night was Maeve. Maeve wasn't a warrior, a princess, or anyone of noble birth. She was a 20-year-old apothecary's daughter. When the massive, monstrous wolves broke through the village palisades, her father Darcy was struck down defending his clinic. Maeve was dragged from his lifeless body by Captain Gideon, a hulking werewolf whose face was heavily scarred from decades of border wars. She was thrown into the back of a slaver's wagon, bound in heavy rusted iron chains, and hauled toward the unforgiving stone fortress of Dunhollow Keep. To the wolves, humans were lower than dirt. They were seen as treacherous, weak, and fit only to serve as thralls in the lower levels of the keep. The journey took 5 agonizing days. While the other human captives wept, prayed, or succumbed to the freezing temperatures, Maeve sat in stoic silence. Her grief was a hardened stone in her chest. She refused to give the monsters the satisfaction of her tears. When they finally arrived at Dunhollow Keep, a massive black stone citadel, carved directly into the side of a jagged mountain, the captives were thrown into the subterranean dungeons. The air reeked of damp earth despair and the coppery scent of old blood. It was here in the freezing dark that Maeve did something that would unknowingly set the wheels of destiny in motion. In the cell opposite hers, a young werewolf, no older than 15, was thrown against the iron bars by the guards. His name was Rowan. He was a juvenile who had failed to control his first shift and had attacked a superior. His arm was brutally fractured, the bone nearly protruding through the skin. The guards left him to rot a harsh lesson in pack discipline. The other humans shrank away in terror, whispering that the beast deserved to die. But Maeve, driven by the healing instincts instilled by her father, tore strips from her own freezing linen underskirt. She reached through the cold iron bars, risking losing her hands to the boy's feral snapping, and set his broken arm. She spoke to him in a low, rhythmic cadence, a tone she used to use on wounded hunting hounds back home. "Breathe," she whispered, her hands steady as she bound the splint. "Your anger is just fear in disguise. Let it go." Rowan, panting and sweating, stopped snarling. He stared at her, his golden eyes wide with a strange, unspoken reverence. He didn't know why, but the panic in his blood instantly quieted under her touch. "You shouldn't help me, human," Rowan rasped. "When the Alpha King holds the culling tomorrow, you will all die." High above the dungeons in the cavernous great hall, Alpha King Roderick sat upon his throne of carved obsidian. Roderick was a legend spoken of in terrified whispers across the continent. At 32, he had fought in 40 battles, his body a map of lethal encounters. He possessed broad shoulders, dark, unkempt hair, and piercing amber eyes that seemed to strip the flesh from anyone he looked at. He was brilliant, ruthless, and entirely alone. By werewolf law, an Alpha King needed a Luna, a fated mate chosen by the moon goddess, to balance his savage nature and bear his heirs. But Roderick had long ago stopped believing in the old gods. He believed in steel blood and the harsh realities of survival. "The pack grows restless, my king," purred Lady Genevieve, stepping out from the shadows. Genevieve was the daughter of the wealthiest elder in the pack, strikingly beautiful with raven hair and a vicious, cunning mind. She had been maneuvering to share Roderick's bed and his throne for years. You cannot wait for a myth. Take me as your chosen mate. We will solidify the bloodlines and crush the remaining human settlements. Roderick looked at her, his expression utterly blank. He felt absolutely nothing for Genevieve, save for a mild irritation. His inner wolf, the primal beast that shared his soul, actively snarled whenever she approached. My bloodline is not your concern. Genevieve, Roderick rumbled his voice, dropping the temperature in the room. Tomorrow is the culling. We will assess the new human thralls and test our unblooded warriors. See to it that the courtyard is prepared. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, rubbing his temples. A strange, inexplicable ache had settled in his chest over the last few days, a restlessness he couldn't name. His wolf was pacing the confines of his mind, agitated, sniffing the air as if searching for something it had lost centuries ago. Roderick walked to the balcony, looking down at the snow-covered courtyard. Tomorrow, blood would stain the white snow. He felt no joy in it. Only the crushing weight of a crown he was growing too tired to wear. The next morning, the war drums echoed through the valleys of the Ethelgard Mountains. The rhythmic, booming sound vibrated into the very marrow of the prisoners' bones. The dungeon doors shrieked open. Guards armed with iron-tipped spears poured in, dragging the humans out of their cells. Maeve stumbled as the freezing morning air hit her, her breath pluming in white clouds. She and 50 other trembling captives were herded into the massive central courtyard of Dunhollow Keep. The sheer scale of the event was terrifying. Thousands of werewolves lined the battlements, the staircases, and the perimeter of the courtyard. Some were in their human forms, clad in dark furs and leather armor. Others remained in their massive wolf forms, their snarls echoing off the stone walls. At the far end of the courtyard, elevated on a stone dais, sat Alpha King Roderick. Maeve looked up, and for a fleeting second, her eyes locked onto the king's. The distance was nearly 100 yards, the courtyard filled with the chaotic scent of thousands of wolves, wood smoke, and fear. Roderick couldn't see her clearly through the crowd of prisoners, nor could he catch her scent over the overwhelming stench of panic. Yet the moment their eyes met, Maeve felt a violent electric jolt strike her chest. It was so intense, she gasped, pressing a hand to her heart. On the dais, Roderick flinched, gripping the armrests of his throne tightly enough to crack the obsidian. His inner wolf suddenly slammed against his ribs, howling a single desperate word into his mind, though the chaotic noise of the crowd drowned out its meaning. "Let the culling begin," announced Elder Cedric, his voice magically amplified to carry over the roar of the pack. The culling was not a simple execution. It was a psychological breaking. Young, unblooded wolves, who had not yet mastered their shifts, were unleashed into the courtyard. The humans were meant to scatter, to run to beg. It taught the young wolves dominance, and it taught the humans absolute crushing submission. A heavy iron gate on the left side of the courtyard rattled upward. Out stepped 3 young wolves in their beast forms. 2 of them were cautious, stalking forward with predatory grace. But the third was different. It was a massive, scarred juvenile, driven entirely mad by the pain of a forced, unnatural shift. Foam dripped from its jaws, and its eyes rolled wildly in its skull. It wasn't looking to dominate. It was looking to tear something to pieces. The crowd of humans shrieked and scattered, falling over each other in the icy mud, trying to press themselves against the locked gates behind them. Maeve didn't run. She stood her ground in the center of the courtyard, her tattered dress blowing in the bitter wind. She saw the feral wolf locking its crazed eyes onto a small human child who had tripped in the snow. Without a second thought, Maeve stepped between the child and the beast. "Tear her apart!" Lady Genevieve screamed from the dais, her eyes gleaming with cruel delight. The feral wolf charged. It was 1,000 pounds of muscle and teeth, closing the distance in seconds. The packed crowd of spectators fell dead silent, anticipating the gruesome spray of blood. 10 feet away. 5 feet. Maeve didn't flinch. She tapped into that same deep, unknown well of authority she had used in the dungeons. But this time, fueled by the adrenaline and the desperate need to protect the child behind her, the energy exploded outward. She raised her hand, her palm facing the charging monster, and spoke in a voice that didn't sound entirely like her own. It carried a strange, ancient, vibrating resonance. "Submit!" The word didn't just hang in the air, it shattered the atmosphere. The massive feral wolf didn't just stop. It slammed into the ground its momentum, sending it sliding through the freezing mud until it stopped inches from Maeve's bare feet. It whined a pathetic high-pitched sound and rolled onto its back, exposing its throat to her in the ultimate display of canine surrender. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the courtyard. Thousands of werewolves stared in absolute stunned horror. A human had just commanded a shifted wolf, and the wolf had obeyed. Genevieve's face twisted into a mask of pure fury. "Witchcraft!" she shrieked, leaping to her feet. "She has cursed the boy. Guards, kill her. Kill her immediately!" Captain Gideon and 4 elite guards drew their broadswords and charged toward Maeve. But as they crossed the invisible threshold into her immediate vicinity, something impossible happened. Gideon's knees buckled. He tried to force himself forward, his face red with exertion, but an invisible, crushing weight forced him down. His broadsword clattered against the stone. Beside him, the 4 elite guards collapsed to the ground, their foreheads pressing into the icy mud. They were shaking, not with fear, but with an overwhelming, instinctual reverence. The aura radiating from the fragile human girl was ancient. It was pure. It was the absolute, undeniable energy of a lunar queen. And the wolves' souls recognized it long before their human minds could comprehend it, or it didn't stop with the guards. Like dominoes falling in a vast, silent chain, the phenomena spread. The werewolves in the front rows of the crowd dropped to their knees. Then the second row. Then the warriors on the battlements. Even Elder Cedric, gasping for breath, found himself sinking to the stone floor of the dais. "Stop it! Stand up, you fools!" Genevieve screamed, her own legs trembling violently. She clutched the stone pillar, fighting the agonizing pull of her inner wolf, which was screaming at her to bow to her rightful queen. Up on the throne, Roderick wasn't bowing. He was trembling, his amber eyes blown wide, his breathing ragged. The wind in the courtyard suddenly shifted, blowing directly from Maeve toward the dais. For the first time, Roderick caught her scent. It pierced through the stench of mud and fear like a blade of pure light. It smelled of crushed winter, pine, fresh rain on cobblestones, and intoxicating sweet vanilla. It was a scent that had haunted his dreams since he was a child. A scent that hit his brain and shattered every wall of ice he had built around his heart. Roderick didn't walk down the stairs of the dais. He vaulted over the edge, landing heavily in the courtyard. The shockwave of his landing went unnoticed, because every single member of the Dunhollow pack, thousands of ruthless, bloodthirsty predators, was now kneeling in the dirt before a human girl in a ragged dress. Roderick slowly walked through the sea of bowed heads. His chest heaved. The closer he got to her, the louder his wolf roared in his mind, drowning out the world, the politics, the war. Maeve watched the massive king approach. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she held her chin high, refusing to break eye contact. Roderick stopped a foot away from her. He looked down at the iron chains binding her wrists. He looked at the bruised, freezing skin of her arms. A terrifying, earth-shattering growl began to vibrate in his chest, a sound of such profound, violent protectiveness that it made the kneeling guards whimper. He slowly reached out his massive, calloused hands, gently taking her chained wrists. He didn't use a key. He gripped the thick iron chains, and with a sickening crack of pure, brute strength, snapped them in half. The heavy iron fell to the snow. Roderick dropped to one knee, taking her small, freezing hands in his, and pressed his forehead against her palms. When he spoke, his voice was thick, desperate, and filled with a devotion that shook the very foundations of the keep. Mine. According to the translated diaries of Lady Margaret Hastings, recently recovered from the private Harrington Estate archives in London, what followed the culling of 1142 was not just a romantic awakening, but a political earthquake that fractured the werewolf world. In the freezing courtyard of Dunhollow Keep, Alpha King, Roderick scooped Maeve into his massive arms. She was shivering uncontrollably, her ragged dress soaked with icy mud. Yet to Roderick, she weighed nothing. He held her against his broad chest, burying his face in her tangled hair, as his wolf purred a deep, rumbling vibration that echoed through the silent courtyard. The thousands of werewolves, still kneeling in the snow, parted like the Red Sea, as Roderick carried his human mate toward the royal stronghold. They kept their eyes averted, instinctively baring their necks in submission to the fragile girl in their king's arms. "You're freezing," Roderick murmured, his voice, a gravelly whisper, meant only for her. He ignored the gasps of his court. He ignored the bewildered stares of the human prisoners. He only had eyes for the apothecary's daughter. "Put me down!" Maeve weakly protested, her hands pushing against the thick leather of his armor. Her mind was reeling. The electric current of the mate bond was flooding her veins, whispering ancient truths into her soul, but her human logic fought it bitterly. "You are a monster. Your men killed my father." Roderick's jaw clenched, a flash of profound guilt darkening his amber eyes. "And for that, I will spend the rest of my immortal life seeking your forgiveness, my queen. But right now, you need warmth or you will perish." He carried her up the winding obsidian stairs to the highest tower of the keep, kicking open the heavy oak doors to the royal chambers. The room was massive, dominated by a roaring hearth, and draped in thick black furs. Roderick gently placed her on the edge of the sprawling bed. He didn't summon servants. Instead, the most feared warlord in the Northern Territories dropped to his knees, filled a brass basin with warm water from an iron kettle, and began to carefully wash the freezing mud from Maeve's bare, bruised feet. Maeve watched him, utterly bewildered. The ruthless Alpha King, a man whose name made human kings tremble in their castles, was tending to her wounds with the trembling reverence of a monk before a deity. "Why did they bow to me?" Maeve finally asked, her voice trembling. "I am just a human." Roderick looked up the firelight, catching the sharp, brutal angles of his face. "You are not just a human, Maeve. The aura you projected in that courtyard, it was the pure, unfiltered dominance of a true Luna. The wolves bowed because their souls recognized their mother. But there is a history here that I do not understand. Only the bloodline of the first pact, a human bloodline lost centuries ago, possesses that power." Maeve's breath hitched. Her father had always kept their family history a fiercely guarded secret. "My mother," she whispered. "Before she died, she told me our true family name was not Smith. It was Pendleton. She fled the southern courts to live a quiet life in the mountains." Roderick's eyes widened in sheer shock. The House of Pendleton. It was not a myth. They were the original human monarchs who had formed the first peace treaties with the werewolf ancestors. Maeve was not merely an apothecary's daughter, she was the last living heir to the ancient human throne. But while the king and his new queen uncovered the truth of her lineage in the high tower, a vicious treason was brewing in the lower levels of the keep. Elder Cedric and Lady Genevieve stood in the shadowed alcove of the war room. Genevieve was pacing like a caged predator, her fingernails biting into her palms until they bled. He carried a human peasant into the royal chambers. Genevieve hissed her eyes, glowing with a toxic, sickly yellow light. He humiliated me before the entire pack. She used dark magic, Cedric. No human possesses the power of a Luna. It is an illusion, a trick. Cedric, his face lined with centuries of bitter cruelty, stroked his white beard. Whether it is a trick or not, the pack's loyalty is fracturing. Half of our warriors believe she is the reincarnated goddess of the first pact. The other half are purists, disgusted by the idea of bowing to a mortal. We must act quickly, Genevieve. If Roderick completes the mating bond and marks her, her position will be absolute. She mustn't survive the night. Genevieve smiled a twisted, venomous expression. She reached into her cloak and produced a small glass vial, filled with a dark, oily liquid. The king has ordered a feast to be brought to his chambers. I have already bribed the kitchen thralls. This is distilled wolfsbane mixed with pure hemlock. It will look like her weak human heart simply gave out from the shock of the culling. An hour later, a timid servant knocked on the heavy doors of the royal chamber, carrying a silver tray laden with roasted meats, fresh bread, and 2 golden goblets of spiced wine. Roderick took the tray, dismissing the servant with a curt nod, and brought it to the bed where Maeve sat, now dressed in a soft, woven tunic. "You must eat," Roderick said softly, offering her one of the golden goblets. "You have endured a shock to your system." Maeve reached for the goblet. Her years working alongside her father in the apothecary clinic had trained her senses to be exceptionally sharp. As the rim of the goblet neared her lips, she paused. Over the rich, heady scent of cinnamon and warm wine, she detected something else. It was faint, a sharp, metallic bitterness, accompanied by the distinct earthy odor of crushed hemlock root. "Don't drink that," Maeve said sharply, swatting the goblet from Roderick's hand. The heavy gold cup clattered to the stone floor, spilling the dark red wine. As the liquid seeped into the cracks of the stone, it began to hiss a faint acidic smoke, rising into the air. The wolfsbane reacted violently to the trace elements of silver in the floorboards. Roderick stared at the smoking wine, and in an instant, the gentle, adoring mate vanished. The Alpha King returned. A monstrous, ear-shattering roar ripped from his throat, shaking the very foundations of the tower. His bones cracked and popped, his human skin stretching as his inner lichen tore its way to the surface, driven mad by the attempted murder of his mate. Black fur erupted along his arms, his claws extending into lethal curved daggers. "Stay here," Roderick commanded, his voice, now a demonic, dual-toned growl. "Bar the door." But Maeve was a Pendleton. The blood of ancient kings ran in her veins. She did not cower. "I am your mate," she said, standing up, her bare feet planted firmly on the cold stone. "Where you go, I go. If they want to test their queen, let them face me." Roderick looked at her, his golden eyes blazing with a mixture of absolute awe and feral pride. He nodded once, taking her hand. They descended the spiraling staircase and pushed open the doors to the great hall. The hall was in absolute chaos. Genevieve and Elder Cedric had not waited for the poison to take effect. They had rallied 300 purist warriors, massive bloodthirsty wolves who refused the new order and had cornered Roderick's loyal guards. Swords clashed and feral snarls echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "There," Genevieve shrieked from the center of the hall, pointing a bloodied sword at the staircase. "The king is bewitched! Kill the human witch, and free our Alpha!" The rebel wolves turned their eyes, locking onto Maeve. A dozen of them shifted into their massive beast forms, their jaws snapping as they charged the stairs. Roderick leapt in front of Maeve, intercepting the first 3 wolves with brutal, devastating force. He tore through the traitors with unmatched savagery, his claws shredding armor and flesh alike. He was a god of war, an unstoppable force of nature, protecting his other half. But there were too many. As Roderick fought off a swarm of attackers, Elder Cedric, in his silver-furred wolf form, bypassed the king and lunged directly at Maeve. Time seemed to slow. Cedric's massive jaws opened, aimed perfectly at Maeve's throat. Maeve didn't step back. She didn't scream. She closed her eyes, reaching deep into the earth, into the ancient bloodline of her ancestors, and pulled on the invisible thread of the mate bond she shared with Roderick and the pack. Her eyes snapped open, and they were no longer a human brown. They were glowing with a blinding, incandescent silver light, the literal manifestation of the moon goddess's blessing. "Kneel." Maeve's voice didn't just echo, it exploded. It was a shockwave of pure telekinetic force. Elder Cedric was slammed out of the air as if hit by a battering ram, crashing into the stone pillars with a sickening crunch. The shockwave rippled outward, crashing over the 300 rebel wolves. The magic of the true Luna was an absolute biological override. Instantly, the entire rebellion collapsed. Weapons fell from trembling hands. The shifted wolves whimpered their bellies, pressing flat against the stone floor, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming aura of their rightful queen. Genevieve fell to her knees, clutching her throat, gasping for air, as the pressure of Maeve's power forced her head down until her forehead touched the cold, unforgiving floor. Roderick, breathing heavily, stood amidst the defeated traitors. He turned to look at his mate, standing at the top of the stairs, cloaked in silver light, magnificent and terrifying. "Treason against the king is a crime," Maeve spoke, her voice ringing with royal authority. She walked down the steps, the sea of wolves parting and cowering as she approached Genevieve. But attempting to murder the Lunar Queen is a sin against the goddess herself. Maeve looked to Roderick. Strip them of their pack status. Banish them to the frozen wastes. If they ever cross the Silver River again, they will be executed. Roderick bowed his head deeply. "As you command, my queen." The rebellion was crushed in a single night. The historical texts found in the Harrington estate detail that the reign of King Roderick and Queen Maeve of the House of Pendleton marked the beginning of a 300-year golden age. Maeve brought her human apothecary knowledge to the pack, curing diseases that had plagued the wolves for centuries, while Roderick's fearsome military might protected the human settlements from all outside threats. The Alpha King, once a ruthless warlord who believed only in blood and steel, became a ruler defined by the fierce, unwavering devotion to the human girl who had chained his heart. She had entered Dunhollow Keep as a prisoner in rusted irons destined to be torn apart in the snow. But by the time the winter thawed the entire pack, and the king himself realized they had not captured a slave, they had brought home their salvation. If this tale of forbidden love, ancient bloodlines, and a captive human who brought a ruthless Alpha King to his knees kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Don't forget to share this incredible story of Queen Maeve and King Roderick with your fellow romance and fantasy lovers. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another epic, heart-pounding saga. Leave a comment below. Would you have the courage to command a feral pack?